his tender. James is a very special, splendid red engine. He has the shiniest and most red, bright paint on all of Sodor and wants all the other engines to know that he likes to look his best, to do his best, and to be the smartest engine. One morning, Henry was feeling ill. This was making James very cross. Ugh, puffed James. He crouched angrily on the turntable and spoke quite rudely to Henry. "Show a wheel, Henry," hissed James. "I'm ill. My boiler's grumbling." "That's rubbish, Henry," whistled James. "You're just being lazy. You don't know what it means to be a really useful engine. I never complain when I feel ill." This made the other engines cross. James walked back into his shed. The other engines were very upset. "You know, James," said Gordon, "you're rude. Henry has a condition and you should be kinder to him," said Gordon. "It's not nice." Thomas and Duck agreed. "You know, James," said Thomas, "you're annoying." "You're right, Thomas," said Duck. "You wouldn't be laughing if this was happening to you, James." "Huh," said Thomas. "You're right again, Duck." "James teases too many engines too often." "Right," said Gordon. "And it's about time you stopped teasing my friend Henry here." "You're all just a bunch of silly engines with silly ideas," said James. "Ugh," said Emily. "You teased me all the time when I was pulling the express." "And we have had enough," the engines agreed. "You are a rude engine," said Thomas. "You teased me when I broke down," said Thomas, "and I still helped you after your accident. And you teased me when I fell in the water," said Duck. "And you took me special coaches too," he said. "He teased me when I first arrived," said Whiff. "You're all just upset because your paintwork isn't as shiny as mine, and you're not so splendid as me," huffed James. "Look at how shiny it is in the sunlight," and he puffed happily onto the turntable, hoping to get away from the engines. "How rude," huffed Henry. "I think James should be taught a lesson," said Whiff. "Most indeed," said Emily. Thomas and Duck had an idea, but they weren't sure how to execute it just yet. James was at the water column taking on water. He was very pleased to have gotten away from all the engines at Tidmouth's sheds. He was simmering happily when Duck pulled up with some trucks. "You know, James," huffed Duck, "you should be nicer to Henry." "Why?" "It seems as if you're getting too big for your tender," said Duck. "That's rubbish, Duck. You know nothing of having a tender. You're just a small little tank engine." "You know nothing of being a big, strong engine," huffed James. "Now don't you? Scurry off. See you later." James steamed crossly away. James had to take a train of workmen to the wharf. He was still cross about Henry and Duck and backed up to his coaches and biffed the coach crossly. He biffed the coach so hard that it derailed. Then the two oily diesels Splatter and Dodge rolled up alongside James. "What do you freaks want?" "Whoa, James," said Splatter. "We just came to tell you," said Dodge, "that you look very silly with your coach derailed." "Losers," huffed James. When re-railing the coach, James didn't realize that his tender coupling was detangling. But James didn't know this yet. Molly arrived. "Hello, James," she said. "I have to tell you that your tender coupling looks loose. You may want to check that one out before you leave the yards," she said. "Why would I do that? Stop telling me what to do," huffed James. "I can manage on my own." All right," said Molly. "Suit yourself." And she pulled away with her train of trucks. Then Mario the Diesel arrived. "Hello, James," she said. "Your tender coupling looks a little loose. I don't think you should be pulling anything right now." "Nonsense! Goodbye, silly, dirty diesel," said James. "Well," said Mario, "I was just trying to give you some pointers." "I don't need any pointers. Now get lost, you little old thing," said James. And he puffed away. "Silly Mario, silly little diesel, thinking she knows better than me," puffed James confidently. James made it to the wharf. Colin was very pleased to see James chuff up with the workmen. "Thank you, James, for bringing the workmen to fix me. I can't work unless I'm fixed," said Colin. That afternoon, it was time for James to take the workmen home again. "Thank you, James," said Colin. James steamed proudly away. James had to go up the hill. The other way back was closed. James began climbing the hill. He started to complain. "I can't climb hills," he puffed. "But Henry is a better engine at climbing hills than I am." James's tender coupling continued to detangle. With one final jolt, the coupling between James and his tender broke. James rolled one way and his tender rolled the opposite way. His tender and coach rolled backwards. "Help!" cried James as he rolled down the hill. A very frightened James raced past a very surprised Henry. "Whoa! Was that James without his tender?" huffed Henry. James raced right into the docks. Cranky the Crane was loading up a truck of fish for Arthur to take to the fishing village. James raced right into the fish. Oh! Fish splattered everywhere. The other engines laughed. James was covered in fish. My, James," said Arthur, "I think I was meant to deliver this train." "My, James," said Cranky, "you're tenderless and fishy." "Just get help," squelched James. Harvey, the crane engine, was sent to pull James out of the mess. "Dear, oh dear, James, I expect you'll have some fishy tales to tell," said Harvey. Harvey helped James back to Tidmouth Sheds. At Tidmouth Sheds, the engines all thought it was very funny. "Fish, fish, James," said Henry. "Trout, trout, James," the engines chuffed. The fat controller was cross. "Silence," he boomed. "James, tomorrow Thomas will come and help you find your tender." James was very disappointed. He didn't want to work with Thomas. "Ugh! First, James loses his tender and needs Thomas's help," teased Gordon. All the engines laughed. James was very embarrassed. Next morning, Thomas and James went to see Colin at the wharf. "Hello, Colin," said Thomas. "Have you seen James's tender?" "Yes, indeed I have seen your tender, James. It flew right past me yesterday." "Philip collected the workmen, but he didn't have your tender," said Colin sadly. James was disheartened. "Oh well," he huffed, "off to find Philip." "Where do you think Philip is?" said James. "At Knapford," chuffed Thomas. Thomas and James arrived at Knapford Yards. They saw Mario the Diesel. "Hello, Mario," said Thomas. "Have you seen Philip?" "No, I have not. Since James was rude to me before, now I'm not going to help him. Thank you very much," she said bluntly. James was disappointed. He knew he should not have been so rude to Mario. "Come on, James," said Thomas. "Maybe now you'll learn a lesson in being nice." "I should hope so," said Mario. Thomas and James puffed all over the island of Sodor. They looked everywhere. They puffed left and right, but there was still no sign of James's tender. At last they gave up, and Thomas parked James at Tidmouth Sheds. "I'm sorry, James, but you'll have to stay here until we find your tender," he said. "Huh," said James. "I knew you couldn't find my tender." "Oh, just sit in the shed until someone else comes to help you," said Thomas. "Maybe I'll find your tender while I'm doing my own jobs." Henry and Duck had to do James's work as well as their own. James wasn't having a very good afternoon. He thought it'd be fun to sit in the shed all day. Ugh, I wish I hadn't been silly and lost my tender. Now everyone's disappointed in me. Then, Morgan, the new steam engine, rounded the bend. Hello, James. What are you doing here? Said James. Why aren't you at the Coliseum? He chuffed. Have you found my tender? He gasped. No, I haven't found your tender. I've got a special passenger on board. Hello, James, said the special passenger. James was surprised. Batman! You're Batman! What are you doing here? I'm on a mining expedition with Morgan here, said Batman. It's nice to meet you, James. Why are you in the shed? I was silly and lost my tender, and now I can't be really useful. Come on, said Morgan. I know just how you can be really useful. Batman turned Morgan around on the turntable. Where are you taking me? Asked James. On an adventure, said Morgan. Come along now, couple up. So, when chains were attached, Morgan pulled James out of the berth. Come on, James, it's time to have the time of your life, called Morgan. Woo! James was excited. What mine are we going to? Asked James. My mine. The one that's named after me, said Morgan. Morgan's mine. It's my favorite of all the mines. You have a favorite mine? Asked James. Why, yes, of course, said Morgan. Come on, we're almost there. They whizzed up the Coliseum hill. Monique was puffing along the bridge. Then she stopped. Oh no, I'm out of coal, she cried. I can't get to the station to pull my passengers. James and Morgan raced up the hill, and then it happened. Ouch! You needn't push me, said Monique. I was in trouble. We're sorry, the engines apologized. What's going on here? Said Batman. You knocked us off the tracks, you imbecile, Batman. Yes. And I'm looking for the stolen maps and minerals near Great Waterton. The line should start somewhere around here. Whoa! Oh! Everyone laughed and laughed. Is he alright? Asked Monique. I'll look, said Carter Moxon. I don't think I've found anything. So what are you all doing here on this line? It's dangerous to sit on this track like this, said James. We have to get moving. Then a car came along. Hello, she said. What seems to be your problem? She asked, sweetly. We need to know how to get to Morgan's mine from down here, said Morgan. Oh, just take the tractor you're on all the way down Gordon's Hill and through 3 junctions through Mayfleet. Great, thanks, said Batman. Come on, everyone. Everyone climbed into the engine's cabs and they were off again. Whee! Cried the engines. Morgan, James, and Monique thundered down the hill. But they didn't see Derek and Alyssa shunting James's tender past them. Onward for adventure, they called. Meanwhile, Thomas, Duck, and Henry arrived at Tidman's sheds. Where's James? They cried as they peered into his berth. How did he even get out of the sheds? Cried Thomas. I shunted him here and told him to stay put. We must look for James, said the Fat Controller. This is an emergency, he called. We'll each take different routes, said the engines. No, said the Fat Controller. Let's all stay together. Finally, the cattle cave arrived at Morgan's mine. Let's go, said Batman. I can get in easily. I'm worried leading this parade, said Monique. Wilbert was shunting at the dairy. He heard the loud crash and knew something was amiss. What's going on? He cried. I'd better go investigate, he said, and he left the milk trucks and the milk tankers at the dairy. Monique, James, and Morgan found their way at the pier of the mine. Well, we can start mining here for the minerals, said Batman. But Batman, this is a dangerous rock formation. There are always accidents and landslides and rock slides here. Never mind, said Batman. We can do it. Just give me a wrench and I'll be through in no time at all. You're Bruce Wayne, said Monique. You didn't know that Batman's real name is Bruce Wayne, said Morgan. Oh, come on, every real Batman fan knows that, said James. Even I do, said Carter Markson, and I don't even have time to watch TV. Then there was a large object that brought down the large crumbling noise of rocks. Rocks pelted the crew, hitting the engines, and soon they were all stranded. James and the others were buried under the rocks, and Batman's mask flew away. I'm sorry, Derek, cried Alyssa. I didn't mean to get us lost. Now you won't be able to go to the diesel works. And now I'm stuck here with you in the middle of nowhere, and we have no way to get out of this. The Fat Controller will be upset with us. No, Alyssa. The Fat Controller will be upset with me for having faulty springs and stuff. Then Wilbert puffed down the hillside branch line. What are you two doing just randomly on this set of tracks? Said Wilbert. There's been a loud crash at the mine just below us, and we ought to check it out. I do hope that everyone involved is all right, said Alyssa. I hope so too, but we better get down there, and I don't know how to power through all those rocks. Then Thomas, Duck, and Henry arrived. What's this? Said the engines. Party on the tracks, chuffed Thomas cheekily. No games, whistled Wilbert. There seems to be some sense of trouble at the mine. It must be James, said the Fat Controller. He's not at the sheds. I hope all's well with him. Then we ought to go check it out now, said Wilbert. And I know just what to get, he chucked. Move out of my way, please, Thomas, Duck, and Henry. So they did. The engine shunted onto the other line, and Wilbert steamed away. Wilbert later returned with the jet engine. Bust my buffers, cried Thomas. He'd not seen the jet engine for a long time. We're going to power through the mine with the jet engine. It pushes forward by releasing hot air out of its back. Well, said the Fat Controller, I've not seen this for a while. Well done, Wilbert. So, the engines arrived at Morgan's mine just at the foot, and Wilbert bravely got ready. Come on, said the Fat Controller. The ignition was alight, and Wilbert shunted the jet engine into the mine. And at last, with Wilbert's help, they burst through the mine. Everyone was free. Hooray! They all cheered. But then they realized when they saw the Fat Controller. Uh-oh, said Carter Markson. We're all in trouble now. It wasn't my fault, sir, said Monique. I was pushed into this. I just wanted to pull my train. Don't worry, said Wilbert. We're just happy everyone is okay. And we knew you left it with sheds, said Duck. Oh, James was very embarrassed. He looked shamefaced. He knew he had caused trouble. Please, sir, said Batman. It was all my fault. I got everyone into this mess. Well, I'm glad he's recognizing that he did all of this, said the engines. Hey, it's all right, said Morgan. We all decided to go on this adventure. Adventure can be good, said Wilbert, but not at the expense of your safety, finished the Fat Controller. And oh, look, here's your hat, Bruce, said the Fat Controller. My hat! I'll see to it that it's mine again. And he sprinted over to his hat as quickly as he could. Reunited at last, he said. I don't know if I was really Batman or not while I was stuck without my hat. Come on, said Carter Markson to Monique. Time to go back to the Coliseum. The engines were pleased to be going safely home. You five have caused an inconsiderable amount of confusion and delay, said the Fat Controller. We're all sorry, said Batman. I don't know how safe I was really being, said Monique. I'm sorry I'm late with my train, and we all could have died. But you didn't, said the Fat Controller. And James, said Alyssa, We have something special of yours, said Derek. Your tender's right there. That's where we lost it, said Alyssa. Oh, groaned James. James, I'll see to it that you stay in the shed with your tender this time. Maybe now you'll learn what it's like to listen. The other engines laughed and laughed at James. We're sorry, James, that we got you in trouble. Everyone went home group by group to recount the day's events. Some were very happy with the conclusion of the day, and James puffed happily home with his tender in tow. James was very pleased to have his tender back. Thank you, Duck. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Henry. Now, I'm sorry I was so rude to all of you, said James. Never mind, said Henry. Do you promise to be a really respectful engine now? I can't make those type of promises, chuffed James. And I heard a big blast in the mine, so I got the jet engine and the fat controller let me power it and burst through the mine. Well, it certainly seems like you had fun today, said Florence. Yes, said Belle. It is important to get away from your usual jobs. Of course, said Wilbur, but I'd like to become a fire engine. What are the requirements? You don't exactly meet the requirements. Yeah, you have to, be a fire truck, said Hazel. I don't need to be a fire truck. Belle is a fire engine with cannons stuck to her boiler. Yes, I am. And I don't necessarily like my design. But you don't have any water cannons. Look, I'm worthy. Sorry. Yeah, no, not good.